Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on the migration. We have our world expert and world famous speaker, Mr. Markley. Mr. Markley, the floor is yours and it's open. You can discuss about migration. Next one, you
I
go
mean,
ahead.
migration has been very much an important issue in general. I'm seeing a lot of countries that are dealing with migrations and trying to figure out how they are going to handle their migrants and all along those lines, because it is definitely something that is very important, not just here in the United States. You know, that we're having people that are even talking about building walls and building things that might stop the migrants from coming in. But then there is a whole conversation about the importance of migrants to society, because definitely whether you are in the United States or whether you're in Spain or whether you're in a number of other places, the migrant population is what drives a lot of the innovation and all in that space, because there's even some jobs that people will not do, but the migrant population will do those jobs, because that has been a conversation even here in the United States, where there are sometimes farmers and others that are in that migrant space, and not all the times do they want to do the hard labor, because a lot of times it is very hard labor that a lot of the migrants are doing, whether that is in agriculture or whether that is in construction, whether that is in a number of other industries as well. So I know that there have been conversations around migrants and the importance of migrants, not just here in the United States, but also in Spain and other places as well. So there's definitely a conversation as to where the migrants will go and what the migrant population will do in the sense of being able to help in the growing economies. And I think that that is something that we're seeing even in second and third world countries as well. Because definitely, if you take England, England has a large African migrant population, and some of those migrants, I know a few of them are working in the medical fields and working as nurses and doctors and all along those lines. And definitely that is part of the migrant community that is doing more advanced kind of work. But then there are some of the migrants that are doing more of the labor kind of work as well. Because, as a matter of fact, I live near Duke University, and I can tell you that recently there have been Chinese immigrants that have moved here to go to school and everything. As a matter of fact, we had a group of nurses from all over the country that came to the Cultural Arts Center that I work at as part of a exchange program. So some of the nurses came from some of the Asian countries, some of the African countries, and a number of other places, and the students will be going to their respective countries as well. So they were coming in, and we're sending people out as well. But even here where I live at this apartment complex, I think my upstairs neighbors that just moved in are of Chinese descent. So I'm not sure if they are actually from China or one of the other Asian countries and all along those lines. But I've definitely talked to folks that are coming here for education. As a matter of fact, I was at a bus stop about a month ago and ran into a young lady that was here for a 5 to 6 week fellowship, and she had come literally from mainland China and all in that space. So if she hasn't gone back, she'll be going back very shortly. But she came down here to get her education and all along those lines. So there are a number of folks that are coming through the migrant lanes to do a variety of things in that space. So definitely that is part of the ongoing conversation. And one of the conversations that takes place is what to do with the migrants. I mean, one of the kind of slogans of the United States is "Give us your huddled masses," which means that they welcome migrants into the country to do various kinds of work and all in that space. But then sometimes there are times that the laws and the rules change and all in that space. So it'll be very interesting to see what goes on in conversations and all along those lines. But that's just some of my opening thoughts about the importance of migrants. And I'm glad to see that Donald has joined us as well, and he might have some thoughts, and we'll see if any other folks join into the discussion. But the migrant conversation has been a very big one here in North Carolina. We have a large migrant population that does a lot of work both in the agricultural industry as well as in the construction industries as well. And there are some people that are wanting more restrictive laws around migration. I'm sure Donald can speak to this as well, because sometimes they are not just wanting restrictive laws of different sorts, because, like I said, sometimes they are wanting to put walls up to stop people from coming in or stopping certain elements to come in. Because there will be some people that will say that there are criminal elements that come in with some of the migrant population, but I would argue that is not the majority. And there is also different ways that migrants are handled. For example, if you are on an H-2-1 visa, which is more of the educational kind of visas, and I think a lot of the Indian population uses that, that is treated differently than somebody that's coming in the more traditional migrant avenues from Mexico or even from Canada, and all in that space. But like I said, the laws have changed recently. I remember many years ago, and then I definitely want to hear from Donald, a friend of mine that was from Portland. I think they were from Portland, one of the West Coast states. They literally went across Canada and was going to visit and see some of the tourism attractions. And I was cat and dog sitting at the time, and they literally had to call me to do an emergency rescue because they left their passport. So when they went across the border, they then there was no problem going from the U.S. to Canada without the passport, but coming back the United States, and this was maybe about 10, 12 years ago, they wanted to see that passport. They didn't have the passport, so I had to scramble through their household items and find out where they told me it was, find it, photocopy it, and send it to them so that they could get back across the lands back to the United States. And I think that some of those rules might even be tighter now after COVID and some of the other things that have taken place. But Donald, what are your thoughts around migration? I was just giving some immediate insights into my thoughts and all along those lines, and we'll see if other folks join us. But what are your thoughts around migration? You're on mute. You're on mute. Donald, you're on mute.
Oops. Well, fortunately, I was lucky enough to be backstage while you were and got to hear a lot of what you were saying. So I did. Sharif, I guess he's having a little connection problem right now.
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, it's funny that you should say that about Canada. I have a couple of stories about that. I just went and visited the Great Lakes, but somehow when I moved, I'd misplaced my passport, so I couldn't even get into Canada, much less get or back. So they're pretty tight now. Even before COVID, I flew there, and they make you go through customs and the whole bit. It's like just like going to Europe or something now. Yeah, it used to be you could just drive over and back and nobody gave a rat's ass. It was a lot easier.
Yeah, it was a lot easier.
In Silicon Valley, we have, in San Francisco and this part of California, I know Research Park Triangle's a lot like that too.
Right.
We just have tons and tons of high-tech immigrants. So there's tons of people from India, but everywhere, from Germany, from Europe, from everywhere. And these people are very, very well educated and very sophisticated. In fact, I don't know if it's true now, but in about 2009 was the last time I looked at this statistic. There was more companies started in Silicon Valley by Chinese and Indians than anyone else. So, and where I live in California, white people like me are about a third.
Wow.
So we're outnumbered 2-1. And I love it. We've got great food. We've got interesting people that you can talk to from all different cultures. You go around, there's Zoroastrian churches and, Hindu temples and, every kind of thing that you could possibly imagine. And it makes life super, super great. And around here, we love immigrants. They're kind of the backbone. There was a movie and, on the other end, there's all the people like you were talking about that are, doing our construction, doing our restaurants, cleaning our homes, taking care of our kids. And a lot of them, people kind of look down on them, as you said, that some people are criminals and all kind of stuff. But I remember talking to the cook at a local restaurant, and he said, he came here, and that's what he was doing, was a cook, and he was supporting his 2 kids, and one was in law school and the other was in medical school.
Wow.
So so in California, we just basically our immigrant is, especially from Latin America, most people come from Central America and Mexico, most of our immigrants, and they're hardworking, incredibly hardworking, incredibly honest. And so if you look at the actual statistics, they've done studies, and immigrants are far less likely to commit crimes than people who were born and raised here. So the most dangerous people in our country are white males.
Yep. Just say that and everything, Donald, because one of the things that's really fascinating in that sense is that a lot of times they will still have ties to their home country. I was actually just talking to Miss Ochella, who is a friend of mine, is actually the second generation, because I've known the parents and now the daughter and son. I know the daughter, I sometimes is going to a dance class and some of the other things that are going on a regular basis at the co-op that I work at. And what I noticed is that she was talking about how her mom will spend a lot of time in Kenya, and dad pretty much lives in Kenya, but they are from Kenya, and they definitely have a very popular Kenyan restaurant that is there, the Palace, the catered restaurant there as of yet. They are looking at possibly, and then one of our Durham is married woman from Zimbabwe, very popular restaurant and everything. And there are some popular Asian restaurants, some popular Indian restaurants, definitely even like Ethiopian restaurants. Like you just said, there's amazing food that's coming from our immigrant population as well, and food trucks, some of them.
Isn't it? That's so wonderful.
Mm-hmm. No,
I said that's wonderful.
Yep. Because even Barroca Soul, a Puerto Rican, Latin American restaurant, and it started off as a food truck and then became a restaurant where they are doing quite well. And really, there's actually a second chain. A lot of these restaurants are opening new chains, and the nature of what they're doing and great food as well. It's amazing to be able to get those. We can't visit the country because I know I don't do enough travel myself and everything, but it's good just to get that the food connection of the different
I was working at a company for a while called NetApp, and they make high-end storage systems that you can't lose any data. They have enough redundancy in them, that so banks and people who really can't lose data buy them. They're very expensive. But I was working there, and that company had more Indians working for it than people that were Caucasians that were born in America by far. And so my boss was in India, an Indian, and then the guy in the cube next to me was an Indian, and we'd go out for Indian food sometimes. And one of the things they showed me is that what they do is on their breaks sometimes there was a Hindu temple right across the street, basically just down the street. And they took me over there and they said, well, see, you can come here anytime you want, and you can get food and you can get tea or, whatever. It's just, we keep this, open for people. And, there's just all this stuff going on that we don't get, we're so lucky to get to be able to be introduced to. And, that I just love the fact that we have these different cultures here. And so, but back to what you were saying about one of the things that's happening now when we talk about migration that's kind of important is that people are getting forced to move. Like right now, the people in Maui, for instance, don't have homes. The people, because of the climate change, people are going to have to be migrating a whole heck of a lot more than they have in the past. In the United States right now, and fortunately it's less in Europe, because the Europeans have been taking millions of Syrian refugees and refugees from other places. And there is a, just like in the United States, there's these just basic racist, I guess, I don't know what their problem is, but there's just these people who have this fear and hate of immigrants. And it's funny because if some of the people that I see on the internet and stuff that are most rabidly against immigrants live in areas where there aren't any immigrants.
Mm-hmm. True.
So, the truth of the matter is anything that's outside of our experience, we have to make up. So, I have to make up. I've never been to Beijing. I've never been to, I've been to Istanbul. I've never been to, Berlin. But, so I make up Berlin and I make up Beijing. I don't know those places. They're just in my mind. And so if there's people that I've never encountered before, I have to make them up too. And what information do I use to make up these people that I've never encountered? And it's unfortunate that there's a lot of people in the United States who tell stories about people that make them less and make them scary and make them do all kinds of varying kinds of things to make people afraid of them, even though they've never seen them and never. If you meet somebody, there's a saying that I love, which is, it's hard to hate close up. Mm-hmm. And so I have a couple of super good friends from Kenya, and they've invited me to come and stay at their house. One of them has, and I've really got to do that in the next year or two. And because, what an opportunity. I mean, immigrants are wonderful. Anyway, I'd love to hear
Go ahead.
What you have to say, Sylvie.
Sylvie.
Hi, Sylvie. Nice to meet you.
We have our new friends.
Yes. Thank you for the invitation. So I just jumped in. So feel free also to ask me questions to guide me about some interesting facts that you would like to know. But I can rapidly just give you an overview of my activities around migration. So first of all, let's say the biggest impact that I can provide is that right now, due to climate change, we see that there will be a lot of migrations coming up in the future due to climate change. So we need also to think about solutions that can have an impact on this topic, and let's say how to, of course, quantify and measure what's going to happen to be able to compare solutions. So that's probably one thing that I'm, let's say, in parallel working on. And my main topic currently is carbon credits. So it's always having a way of financing carbon reductions with, on top, a benefit for society. So in this case, mitigating the, let's say, the impact on migrations. So one concrete example of what I'm working on at the moment is supporting food banks to redirect surplus foods from supermarkets and farmers and redistribute these surplus foods to people in need. And often it's also people from migration backgrounds, refugees arriving to different countries which need immediate emergency support. Yes, so this is the big impact on the, let's say, social side and the connects with migrations. And why surplus food is a topic for carbon credits and getting financed through this mechanism. It's because when food goes to landfill, it rots, and by rotting, it creates methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas, which is right now 80 times more, let's say, polluting than carbon dioxide. All right, yeah. So when companies, let's say, pollute more, they need to compensate their emissions. Often it's by tree planting some trees somewhere just to compensate. And now we're creating mechanisms, solutions to be able to have other options to compensate the carbon emissions by supporting local projects that are also saving carbon emissions, just like saving food, for instance, which helps saving carbon emissions. Yeah, and we are building activities that support both carbon emission savings and benefiting to the society. If we can quantify and put a cost on that, then we can also have that part compensated by people who would have to pay for it, and even more if it's not being prevented. In short, yeah. On top, about the activities where I'm involved currently, I'm part of a humanitarian incubator, which is a startup boat for, let's say, and I'm a founding member also of a new activity, which is called Cosmopolis, which is a network, a social network for supporting migrants into other countries, because of course there are a lot of questions arising when you reach a new country. Of course, going from getting to know the culture and how to get papers and also work. Also in a more, let's say, safe way, where you can have some buddies, some coaches, having some psychological support. And for this, Cosmopolis is also working with, let's say, some organizations that are regularly dealing with migrations and, in short, refugee topics and issues. So that's one part. And I would say there are also additional parts that we are working on, yeah. And so it's also another project that we would like to create a blueprint exactly for employment and supporting, for instance, connecting companies that have needs and could, in fact, support training of a new workforce to probably also support training not only on-site but also in the country itself, which normally is subjected to migrations due to economical or climate reasons. So we are in touch right now with some corporate organizations to set up this kind of training. So it could be also for industrial and manufacturing, and not only for, I think I heard about it, like normally migrants work in, let's say, restaurants or hotels. And of course, there are also some migrants, especially those for political reasons, that have also other skills. So you have very highly educated migrants that are definitely looking for jobs that could be filling some vacancies that are hard to fill from companies looking for skilled labor. That's about it. So feel free to ask me any questions. Yeah.
Hey there. Hey, Sylvia. One of the things that I've been fascinated by, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, is that certain countries are doing a lot of the migrant travel in the sense of coming into the country and staying in the country. Because I know that there are a number of Indian communities and even some of the African communities that come into, say, the United States or the UK, and they stay there. But as I was saying earlier, I have had the pleasure of meeting some people of Asian descent and all in that background. And I know sometimes they are not planning to come to the country to stay. They are actually coming for education reasons or other reasons, and are either told that they have to come back, or in some cases being forced to come back to their respective countries, and all in that space. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts around that, because I know that, like I said, I just met a woman about 2 or 3 weeks ago that was here when I lived near Duke University to go to a fellowship, and after the fellowship was completed, she was going back to mainland China and all in that space. And the fellowship is either completed, or if it's not completed, it'll be completed in the next week or so. But she was excited to learn a lot about the culture here and the culture that was going on, but she did know that she had to return back home. It wasn't that she was going to be able to stay here long term. So I just wondering if that is a trend that you are seeing more and more of.
Yes, so I can speak about it from the perspective of an employer. Yes,
Yes.
of course, we have currently we have about 25 volunteers from all around the world. So, of course, I see some of our volunteers facing a lot of visa issues. And exactly this is the main topic that's coming up. I have some PhD students who really want to contribute to our mission of healing the broken food system, who want to come for an internship, volunteer for it, but they are refused the visa because the authorities are not sure if they will really return to the country that they are currently living in, even if they have to finish their PhD or anything. So the conditions are very strict and really made very hard to for companies to be able to access to a global pool of talents. So that's what I can say. Of course, what we, I mean, we have some questions also in the chat. Maybe I'll refer to that later. Thank you, Jason, for your question. Yeah. So just to go on with the topic, it's definitely a political topic. I think there's a need of lobbying to be able to address this issue, because of course we have, I can only speak of Europe, because this is a legislation that I know better. There are some options of, for skilled labor to be able to apply for work permits. It's getting easier and easier because authorities have understood that especially for innovation, we need to be able to hire, and there's a lot of vacancies that are not being filled. Yes, so but it's very limited still. It's for very high level, let's say, executives, and we have a whole pyramid of needs. Yes, and of people needed to fill some gaps, and it's really hard to be able to touch these people because of the let's say restrictions around visas and work permits. So the good thing is that to go ahead, we are working remote. That's the only possibility we have right now. Yeah, so that's what I see currently from the entrepreneur perspective. I guess that's basically why it happens is pretty obvious. It's just
Right.
because yes, countries are protective of jobs and their people, but the thing is that those vacancies are really hard to find to fill anyway. So that's why I think it needs a differentiated approach to this employment topic of migrants.
Hey, Sylvia, along those same lines, and this is for both you and Donald, and maybe Sharif has some thoughts about this as well, but I know that sometimes in the migrant conversations, there is the notion of humanitarian aid or people escaping war. And also we did see a lot of migrants that were leaving the Ukraine area and some of the surrounding spaces in that particular conflict because of what was going on between Russia and Ukraine and the Russian invasion of that particular country and Ukrainians fighting back against them and everything. But then there was also, during the beginning of the war, a lot of conversations about the ways that different migrant communities are treated. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about this, but I know that even in the US, there was a whole notion of whether Haitian immigrants were treated in a less fair way than, say, the Cuban immigrants, because the Cuban immigrants come from a certain socioeconomic status and are perceived as being closer to the mainstream society than maybe the Haitian society is. and all along those lines. And I think we saw something similar when people were leaving the European nations and were coming from the African nations, because I definitely remember the early days of the war, how some of the people from Nigeria that were in that particular area studying did not feel that they got the same kind of respect in terms of being treated, even accepted by other countries, than, say, some of the more mainstream European societies did, and all along those lines. Because I remember that discussion that took place in the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war and conflict. But I was just wondering your takes about the ways that different immigrants are treated, and if you had any thoughts, or if Donald or even Sharif had any thoughts about that.
Oh, I mean, out of the gut, yeah, just to add some reflection points to what you're saying, yeah. I mean, rephrasing just to make sure. Yes, you just want to know if I see differences about how immigrants from different origins, let's say, are being treated due to their social economical status or cultural aspects or anything. Yeah.
Exactly.
I would say it's not a question of migrants in general. I would say people are different. You have 10 fingers or 5 fingers, and they are all different, yeah, and are all treated a different way. So different personalities. So it's so diverse. I mean, we cannot, I mean, I cannot say there's a certain pattern for certain types of migrants or anything. Of course, you see certain from the culture, it's more cultural, and based on value, I would say there are some that are able to, let's say, adapt and integrate easier than other cultures that are maybe more staying within their communities. Yeah, that's about learning the language. I think a key and it's not only about migration, it's about integration. Yes, so the key for integration is really this openness and being able to keep, your origins and the richness of your background, and also going into, let's say, I mean, having the genuine wish to be able to integrate within a new society and be a contributing member. That's basically how you get accepted, I would say. Yeah, when you can bring value, people see it and they're happy to have you around. As simple as that. Migrants are not migrants. That's pretty much how it happens when anybody joins a new company or a new environment. Yeah, to make friends, usually you give and you support and you bring value, and usually you have better chances of being accepted. Just to
Yeah,
make
that
it more
makes a lot of
general.
sense. Yeah. Hey, Donald, along those same lines, because that even comes back not even to the migrant conversation, but just the conversation in general. I do remember that in the days of integration versus segregation, there was a whole conversation of assimilation versus non-assimilation. And that being said, there are some migrants that are very much in tune, kind of what Sylvia was talking about, to their culture, and are very much wanting to maintain some of that cultural aspect. So I know that there are some people that will say that they wish that those that are of Spanish descent did not speak as much as Spanish as they will have a habit to do, because that is their culture and all along the lines. And I'm sure you've heard that conversation even there in California. So I just wondering your take, Donald, and if Sylvia has any thoughts as well, because sometimes even in the Chinese culture, I know that there are Mandarin schools, and sometimes people get frustrated when they see what are called Chinese schools and everything, even though you're just encouraging your people to know your own culture and not knocking the culture that you are assimilating into. But I'd love to hear both Donald and Sylvia, and then even Sharice's thoughts around that, because I know that that is a conversation I oftentimes hear with friends of mine, where they will sit there and they will hear somebody speaking Spanish in an elevator, and they'll automatically assume that they're speaking about them, when they're probably just trying to figure out what they're going to have for dinner that afternoon, and where they're going to go for their movie or movie night out, or something that has nothing to do with the people that are in the elevator with them.
I mean, thanks for this question. I guess probably it's more a topic which is very broad, which could be the topic for another call or session, yeah, which is more about integration and politics and best practices, etc. Yeah, I mean, I can just I mean, have bring another element of response. I can only speak of my own experience. Yes, I'm let's say I'm third generation of overseas Chinese. So basically, my grandparents flew the Second World War from the south of China and went to Cambodia from my father's side and Laos from my mother's side. So they were quite integrated in the society, working, support, let's say they were part of their community. It's maybe easier in Asia, let's say, because the cultural difference is not that big. But then due to the Khmer Rouge, they had to, the genocide, they had to go away from Southeast Asia and could find their way to France as refugees. So, I'll pass on the details, but of course, coming into France, I think it's a big topic of migration and assimilation, because of course, France has the history of putting a lot of people in certain types of social housing, which happen to be like ghettos. Yeah, so that's where extremism is happening, yeah, and growing. So probably in this case, people from the same origin are being put together, so they are in community together. So it makes it more difficult to have a social mix. Yeah, so it's basically really a political way, and people have recognized it. And in comparison to some other countries where, people are more spread around, assimilation and integration happens probably in an easier way. And I would say in my case, I'm probably an exception, yes. I did grow up in one of those, let's say, ghettos, yeah. But I could work my way through studying, yeah, getting grants, and doing the work, and basically, I've been with over 20 years of experience, having some corporate management jobs, and also, probably it's my fourth company, being an entrepreneur myself. I guess probably this is a route which is quite unusual, let's say, from a migrant starting with parents starting at the very, let's say, basis of the social ladder. Yeah. But it's possible through integration politics and also through education. That's probably one of the way outs. That's pretty much about it, what I can contribute.
Yeah, yes. I think Jason had a question, and Donald, you're on mute. You're on mute, Donald. You're still on mute.
No, I'm not. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I want to just talk about two. Well, first off, in the thing about the idea of migration is that when somebody migrates from one place to another, they've got to be accepted there, because the people that are possibly welcoming them in, or fighting against them coming in, and there's whole wars that are started because people do migrations. The conflict in Syria has a lot to do with climate change. There was huge droughts, and then the people that couldn't live in the country anymore, and so they moved into the cities, and it created a great deal of conflict there, and that's one of the reasons that the Syrian civil war happened. A huge part of why it happened. And so when we're talking about migration, we've got to understand that with climate change, there's going to be abrupt situations where people abruptly have to move from one place to another, because in the course of several years, they won't have any food because of droughts and other kinds of catastrophes, and they got literally no choice but to leave and go someplace else. And that's happening more and more right now, and we can expect it to continue to accelerate. In Finland, they took Somalian refugees, and Finland was a very kind of, since it's so far in Northern Europe, and it's kind of, they have a very odd language that's not an Indo-European language, and so they have a kind of they're kind of culturally different in some ways than even with even the other Nordic countries, and it's hard to realize that. So having basically Black people from Africa move into Finland, which was pretty much purely white, was a little bit of a shock to the older generations. But what they did is they did not let people go into ghettos. They arranged for them to get jobs as quickly as possible. Education is free in Finland, so if you want to go to university and get a PhD or whatever like that, they'll support you while you do it. And so what they did is they carefully put people into housing and things like that where they were scattered everywhere. And so now you go to Helsinki and even Oulu, and you'll see Black people speaking fluent Finnish, and they're just part of everything. They work at stores, they ride the bus, they're just part of everything. And I saw the change just in a matter of 15 years, and so that really worked. On the other hand, people do have their cultures, and there's a lot of value in those, because we learn a lot of how we think about the world from our parents and the people around us and there's a lot of value in cultures, in different cultures. And that's what I was saying earlier. I just love living here where, whites are a minority, and being exposed to all the different cultures and all the different things I can learn from people, from the way they look at the world. And in the research, I was part of this group called the Silicon Valley Network Analysis Project at Stanford. And one of the type of social network that we looked at are immigrant networks. And what happens is people come from India or Mexico or wherever they happen to be coming from. When they get here, they're not isolated. They have people that have moved here before that are relatives or friends of relatives and friends and stuff like that can help them get established. And there's even in the Chinese communities, they even have like pools of money that they put together to help people, to actually help people, so help each other. And so completely dispersing those networks might be counterproductive. In other words, when the people come without the networks, if the government doesn't really help them, then they're kind of stuck. And so having the networks and having that lack of complete assimilation is actually valuable too, in a way. So I think that it's a complicated issue, and it's something that we need to continue to research and try and figure out which kind of solution works best. But I think there's got to be kind of a balance, and I don't know how to make that happen. But there's advantages to both solutions. I think it's something that we really need to work on, because people are going to have to move, and lots of people. I think of Bangladesh, it's so low lying, and as the oceans rise, all those people, it's practically underwater already anyway. And so, where are all those people going to go? And it's going to have to happen in a way that the people that are living learn to accept migrants. And sadly, I see there's a pretty large backlash against that right now in some places. But that's really all what I wanted to contribute.
No, it's interesting you say that, because as you were saying that, I was thinking about, because I am getting some feedback from you, Donald, and everything. one of the things that I was kind of
Sorry, just a quick moment. Donald, could you please turn off your microphone when you're not speaking, because there's a big echo for Mark and myself. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. What I was going to say that's really interesting in everything is that some of the countries that are close to each other, but their migrants are coming because of war-torn areas. Because I was thinking about, you just mentioned Somalia, and I was thinking about some of the things that are going on even in Niger and everything. And my dad, for a number of years, had the pleasure of teaching in Eritrea. And we all know that Eritrea and Ethiopia have been at war for a number of years and everything. And that creates a migrant situation as well, because some of those people are leaving those war-torn areas. I'm thinking that the same thing happens, even though I'm not a student of this area, between the UK and Ireland and all of that. And that's been going on for decades, if not centuries, and everything. So I sometimes wonder how the whole notion of not just the humanitarian things that are taking place, but also some of these ongoing wars play into the migrant conversation as well. Because like I said, I do know that even here, there are some migrants in North Carolina that have come from the areas of Eritrea and Ethiopia. And I'm sure there are some that have come from Ireland and England. And those are war-torn areas that have been in conflict for a number of years. And we can say the same thing about some of the Southern African countries as well. But I didn't know if you had any take on that, Sylvia, just the nature of how much war plays into the nature of what goes on with our migrant population as well. And I just gave a couple of examples that I'm aware of based on my own family history and things that they have been involved in.
Yes, of course, wars are definitely reason number one, besides economical ones, and then soon, and already happening, as you mentioned, climate, for climate reasons. Yes, of course. I mean, when war happens, it's pretty understandable that you want to escape the horrors, and especially when you are particularly persecuted. Yes, I mean, war can be taken in a broader sense, I would say, which is often, I would say, violence. Yeah, in general, yeah, being at war with even other populations. It doesn't have to be a declared war with other countries. You can have wars within the country itself, yes. And I've heard about, for instance, people having to flee Afghanistan. And especially people on the list of being very, let's say, in particularly delicate and dangerous situations that had to be moved out of the country itself, yes, and could reach some other countries to be safe. That's about it. Yes. So yes, that's my take on this and about wars. I'd say it could even go. Could even go. War could be an even stronger reason why migrations happen, and especially what I see is water. Water could be a reason why people are going to start fighting internally in a country. Lack of food, of course, yeah, which also happens when you don't have enough water to produce. And yes, that's something that where we need solutions, yeah, to be able to avoid this to happen.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. And you actually alluded to something else that I know is a big contributor to migration, which is the whole notion of famine and everything. Because a lot of times people will be leaving their country because they are not able to have the resources that they need. So they might try to go to another country that has greater resources. So I do know that that's why a lot of people come to the Americas. They come to even some of the European countries because they know that they can have some greater resources in those countries versus some of the poor nations that they are in and everything. So I don't know if either you, Sylvia, or Donald have some thoughts about that, but I do know that famine plays a major role in a lot of the reasons that people migrate, and as well as opportunity. Because a lot of times people are looking for opportunity and they may not find enough opportunity in their own respective countries. Because I know that that's even part of the conversation that goes on in the United States, is that some people will say that if we create more opportunities in the country that the people are coming from, then there will be less need for them to come to the United States. So I do know that some of my more conservative friends will point to that aspect of making sure that there are economical reasons for people to stay in their respective countries by making them have more opportunities of jobs and more opportunities of resources, and then they may not be as inclined to come overseas. I, like Donald, love the various cultures. I love going to international festivals and meeting people from different parts of the world. So I think that that might make things a little bit more bland, but I do know that there are friends of mine that would like to make there be greater opportunities in the respective countries that people are coming from. But I don't know if you, Sylvia, or you, Donald, have any thoughts around that.
Well, people say that, but like at United States has had this ability to attract people from all over, from the most educated people. So for an instance, we have some of the best universities, or most of the best universities in the world. So I know Stanford pretty well, but there's Harvard, MIT, Yale, blah, 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 all these universities. And so people know that if they get a degree from one of those universities, they're going to make connections that are going to really help them a lot in their life. And and so we have been attracting really the best and the brightest from around the world. And thanks to the anti-immigrant stuff now, it's becoming very, very difficult now for people to go from other countries to go to universities, are much more difficult than it was. It's harder for them to get visas. And it's interesting. One thing that I want to say is I have a friend who was here, basically kind of overstayed her visa in a way, and she managed to show that she was working even though she actually wasn't working for a little while. She is now, and she was working in something that was a different profession, and she had no trouble whatsoever. She would go to the border and she would tell them, I'm doing this and everything's going to be okay. And they say, okay, fine. And they just let her through, because she was a very attractive, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white woman, and no trouble whatsoever. But I imagine if you're coming from, I know that if you're coming from Latin America now, they're putting up razor wire that is killing people in Texas. They're really trying to kill people instead of having them come into the country. So I mean, it's about the whole. It's about. Yeah, a lot of people don't want to leave. So if we could help countries like El Salvador and Honduras and things like that become more stable and have more economic opportunity, why would somebody necessarily want to leave? It's if we can help the circumstances that are forcing people to migrate, and I wouldn't look at it as the perspective of we want to keep them out. If we do that, then they're not going to come here, which I don't. I like them. I like people to come here, and my family's been in the United States, in America since 1635. And so as far as I'm concerned, we've been here. Almost everybody came since we came. And so I'm glad that everybody's here, and I think they're welcome. In California, my family was here before it was a state. And so, in California, we like to welcome everybody, or I'd like to think we do. But trying to help the people that don't want to have to leave. I mean, having to leave your family and, especially some of the people that come here, it's just a horrifying journey. You can get killed. They come here, they've got, no money really, nothing, no real job, things like that. We don't help them. If we could make it so a person didn't have to do that just out of kindness, it's not a matter of immigration or anything else. It's just being decent human beings. I think we really should try that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Donald, for sharing. My comments go in your direction. I think that I mentioned before that I'm involved also with, let's say, a project that we are setting up. I can't give too many details yet about it, but it's really about training people in their own countries to skills that are needed in manufacturing, for instance, and where a factory could be set up there, so they wouldn't need to migrate, let's say, and have economical means and earn a decent living also in their own country. I think nobody per se wants to leave a country where you're attached. You have your culture, you have your family and friends. People are let's say often forced to migration due to economic. I mean, we mentioned the different reasons. Yes, it's often economical, climate, wars, as we said, and also otherwise family reunion. It's also a reason for more personal reasons why people want to migrate. So yes, so at least for economical reasons, there is this possibility to educate more in the countries. For climate reasons, there are solutions to set up and be able to make sure that I mean, of course, that's a big task. I don't say that easy. We're working on it, and we want to be part of the solution to be able to benchmark all these different solutions and understand the impact behind, to be able to really make a big shift and a big impact for reducing carbon emissions and supporting sustainability in general. Just creating systems that are more circular, more regenerative, to really support. I think we in agriculture and in in nature-based solutions, there is a lot of potential to support long-term, let's say, more sustainable, let's say, health of the planet. All right.
I see that Sharice's back, and we've been having a lively discussion that we're going to wind it down. The thing I was going to add is that I hope that many of the countries will be fair and let more people in and not be establishing all of these restrictive rules. Because we have heard that a number of countries, including the U.S., but definitely some of the European countries, are being more restricted in the way that they are allowing the migrants in. And I understand that from a economical standpoint and from the standpoint of the resources that the migrants may be pulling from. But as I said several times, I am a big fan of the diversity of culture and of the things that culture can give us and everything. So definitely I am one that welcomes many people to come in, not just in the United States, but around the world. But I do know that there are a number of countries that are being more restrictive in the way that they are dealing with their migrant population. And I don't know if Sylvia or Donald have any thoughts around that, but I am hopeful that they will be less restrictive and be more accepting. But that's just my own personal faith, but I do know that there might be reasons that they are being restricted.
Thank you everyone. This is excellent discussions. I request for the concluding remarks for today's session, Madam Sylvia. What's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Okay. Let's say my conclusions would be more that, I mean, first of all, there's a need of information, and that's why the need of this social network and, supporting people who are, let's say, derooted, yes, who are just, moving from one place to the next and having a lot of questions just to be able to integrate themselves, and even with very simple things in everyday life, which could be even going to the supermarket and understanding how to read the labels properly, and how the price system works when they need to buy something. Yeah, could be very simple things from day-to-day life until getting the paper sorted out, job situation or anything, or even moving to another country afterwards, necessary for a family reunion or for other reasons. Yes, I see, as we said, like the rise of climate issues as a reason for migration, and possibilities to tackle that through activities that can benefit also societies in the countries where usually migration happens, where people want to migrate out of the countries. So education and putting up solutions to mitigate the problems of climate change. I think that's where we need to think and act in a systemical way to be able to tackle those very big challenges. And for that, we need to measure, quantify, and be able to compare solutions to have a real discussions based on data and facts. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Donald, proceed concluding your remarks.
Well, I think that Sylvie summed it up pretty well about. But one thing that I want to add that's an important thing is that part of the issue is something that is we don't know how to quantify yet, because as people know that I've got a background in sociology, one of my things, and human beings are really, really complicated, and we don't really have any way of measuring or predicting the kinds of things that groups of people are going to wind up doing in any sort of a systematic way when it comes to attitudes like xenophobia, racism, things like that, the kinds of things that people get together. Like, I'm reading a book right now called How the South Won the Civil War. And it basically shows that a lot of the attitudes that people had before the Civil War haven't changed one bit. And you can see that coming through if you know the history of the United States, that there was the Civil War, and then there was the Reconstruction. And the Reconstruction, the South got so angry at the North that they were basically doing guerrilla warfare against. And finally, the North said, "Well, this is just too much trouble," and they left. And so then the South went back to a system that was very similar to this system they had during slavery, and that went on all the way until the 70s. And that isn't that long ago. And so there's plenty of people alive right now who still incredibly resent the fact that they had to have integration and various and things like that. And there's a huge amount of resentment against the North or the federal government because the federal government forced them to do things that they didn't really want to do. And the point that I'm making about that is that these attitudes go from father to son, or mother to daughter, or mother to son, or whatever, and that they're very, very, very difficult to change. I mean, people are still mad about stuff in Europe that happened 500 years ago. There's groups of people who are still very angry at each other over something that literally happened 500 years ago. And so I don't really know how to, there's no magic solution to that, but I do think that when we're looking and thinking about the immigration that don't just completely think of it from economic terms. I think that we really should put a lot more effort into trying to understand people's motivations and how it is that we can kind of change their mindset so that we don't have people that are violently against immigration. And in some cases, some of these super right-wing leaders, like in Hungary and other places in Europe, have been elected as a consequence of immigration. In fact, Brexit is probably a consequence of fear of immigration. It was, in fact. And Brexit's really caused super big problems in England because it was a stupid idea. But the danger of the anti-immigrant things is something that I wish that we were spending more time trying to just understand culture and people, and not just doing STEM, but doing more sociology and psychology and things like that to try and get a handle on people so that we can make these things work out better.
Thank you, Mr. Markley. What's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, Donald and Sylvia have done an amazing job and all along those lines and everything. So definitely, thanks. Definitely, they have done an amazing job in presenting a lot of the arguments that needed to be said and everything. I would just add, and we've kind of alluded to it, the world is becoming incredibly smaller than what we used to think of the world, because a lot of times we would not be able to communicate and all, but now the power of the internet and the fact that the world is able to communicate, I'm able to talk to Donald, who's all the way in California. I'm here in North Carolina. You're over there in the Malaysian area, Dr. Sharif. I'm not sure exactly where Sylvia is, but I'm thinking that she's definitely here in the United States somewhere along those lines. But it's definitely, oh no, she's in another part of the world and everything. So,
I mean, France and
France,
and Austria mainly.
So she's over there in France, so we're able to communicate and all in that space. So it's just good that we're able to share all this knowledge from around the world and to have this world conversation that is going on. So that is fantastic. And to what something that Donald was saying earlier and all along those lines is that as the world gets smaller and we're dealing with the fact that we're able to communicate on a regular basis, we have to be very careful about the otherism that can happen in society as well, because a lot of times we will want to blame folks that are from a culture that we don't understand. We saw that a lot of people, even during the height of the pandemic, were taking it out on the entire Asian population because of the notion of COVID coming out of the Chinese plants and everything. But there was definitely a lot of that kind of attacks that took place, and we've seen those attacks take place in other parts of the world, no matter what the situation is, because people have this fear of cultures that they don't understand, when I think that we should be learning more about the cultures instead of making rampant wrong misconceptions about people based on our perceptions or those perceptions that our political leaders and social leaders are giving us. But instead of just making assumptions, because you know what they say about assumptions, there's a American saying about assumptions, which is if you want to make a ass, and that phrase and everything of you and me, then making an assumption. And that is kind of an American saying that goes on, and I think that it's one that's been picked up by other parts of the world as well. So assumptions is definitely something that we don't want to do in society, but we also need to find ways to help people, because I know that even here in the United States, a number of the migrants that come here, unfortunately, are also taken advantage of as well, because they're, as to what Sylvia just talked about, they don't always know the language, they don't always know the cultural rules. So sometimes certain institutions, including our banking institutions, are sometimes taking advantage of folks. There's a whole notion here, and this could be, like Sylvia said about other things, a whole other show, because there's definitely the whole notion of predatory lending, which goes on not just in the United States, but around the world, where some of our fiscal institutions will see an organization or see some people and take advantage of them because they know that the people are at a disadvantaged. And that's kind of the notion of what predatory lending is. And I'm sure that it happens not just in the United States, but in other Western nations as well, and all in that space. But Sylvia and even Donald, with his greater world travel, would probably know better than I do. But that's just some of the conversations that I think need to take place in the migrant world and in the world of the overall ecosystem that we exist in, and all in that space. But that would be kind of my immediate thoughts as we wrap up and everything. But just really quickly, I'm curious, does that notion of predatory lending exist in other institutions? Because I know it's a big conversation here in the U.S. Or have you ever heard of that in France or any of those other places, Sylvia? Because like I said, I do know that it has been a concern of our Latin migrant community and even the other migrant communities here, but I'm not 100% sure if it's taking place in other parts of the West.
Thank you.
Sorry, can
Thank
you
you everyone
repeat
for
that?
joining
Oh.
today's session.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
No,
Bye-bye.
Madam Sylvia, you want anything? Thank
No,
you.
just-
Bye-bye.
That was just, I think that's all
no
right.
Yeah, no
Bye-bye.
problem.